Hey, Archie, I'm looking for a shortcut to financial success. Are these rules of thumb a good way to go?
No. Let's talk about it. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, CFP professionals Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today, we're going to talk about rules of thumb. Now, in the financial world, there are a lot of rules of thumb, heuristics, basically little sayings that hold a kernel of truth that you can apply to your financial life that are easy to remember and easy to kind of throw out as a kind of canned bit of advice if someone asks you something. And they have a good purpose, right? They're useful. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stuck around and there wouldn't be so many of them. But they are limited. Their usefulness doesn't apply in all situations, in all times. In fact, sometimes it can be kind of destructive or detrimental if you just go by these rules of thumb.
My favorite, I think, was one that was coined, pun intended, by Ben Franklin. Mm-hmm. He said, "A penny saved is a penny earned."
Yeah.
And it's so true, but we don't make pennies anymore. So, I mean, we're going to have to come up with some new rules of thumb.
A nickel saved is a nickel earned.
That's right.
So just round up to the next coin. Yeah, I mean, there's lots, and again, there's some real truth to that. But again, our lives are bigger and more complex than that, and so you have to take the context of your situation into account when you're trying to make financial decisions using rules of thumb.
You know, I think that rules of thumb are great particularly when you're getting started. Maybe you're not ready to have a financial plan. Maybe you're just getting out and getting your first job, and some of these rules of thumb can get you moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right. So you know, if you use some of these rules of thumb, you're not going to be sorry that you did.
Right.
But when it gets to the point where you've got to get kind of precise about financials and financial planning, then you need to set the rules of thumb aside and maybe do some real number scrunching and some financial planning and make sure that what you're doing achieves the goals that you want to achieve down the road. So, but why don't we just kind of go through some? What do you think, Archie?
Yeah. I would say the first big one is you should save 10% of your income. This one, I'm not sure where it came from, and I think that there's some usefulness in it. If you are young and getting started and you're not sure how much, you got your first job and you're sitting there going through your onboarding process and you get to the section where you're signing up for benefits and you've got your 401k and you're like, well, how much should I put in there? 10% is not a bad number to put in.
Right.
I would say it probably shouldn't stay at 10%. For most people, you're going to probably have to save a little bit more than 10%, but it can be a good starting point.
I like this one because what it's saying is be a saver.
Yeah.
Right? Don't just be a spender, be a saver. You've got to pay yourself first, too, because if you don't do it before you spend your money, you're just going to run out. You're not going to have anything left to save. So you got to do it first. That's the beauty of a 401k is it's coming out of your paycheck first, and then you spend what's left.
Right.
So if you get into if you sort of build that muscle strength, that savings muscle strength, it'll serve you well in life. And I've never met anybody that was sorry that they saved when they got older.
Yeah. I think this really falls apart though if you're relying on this and maybe you're further down the road in life and you don't have as much time for compounding to work in your favor. And maybe you didn't kind of get that sort of inbuilt saving mentality early on, and you're trying to play some catch up. 10% is probably not going to be enough. There's, if you're, down the road, maybe you're making $80,000 a year, let's say, 10% is $8,000 a year. If you're 10, 15 years from retirement, it's just not going to be enough to get you over the finish line with a nest egg that's going to support your lifestyle.
Yeah, you've got to do the financial planning at that point. I do like doing it on a percentage basis rather than a dollar basis, because if you've got it set up so that you're saving a percentage, say 10% or more, every time you get a pay raise or if you work overtime, you're going to be putting a little bit more away.
Right.
So there's a built-in inflation hedge right there, which is super helpful.
A lot of 401ks also offer a percentage bump each year. So you start at 10%. Next year, it jumps to 11 and 12 and 13 and so on until maybe you're maxing out your plan. And meanwhile, you've gotten these raises. So the percentage has gone higher and higher, and the dollar figure has gone up as well. So
here's what you don't want to do, though. You don't want to count your employer's contribution to your retirement plan as part of that 10%.
Right.
We get that question. It's like, okay, if I put 6% in and my employer puts 4%, that's 10%. Is that enough? No, you need to put 10% in. You just need to make it hurt and get it done. The 4% that comes from the employer is on top of that. Problem with the money they put in oftentimes is if you leave before you've been there for 6 years, you forfeit some of it. So make sure you're saving 10% at a minimum.
Yeah.
How about number 2?
So this one is essentially talking about retirement income, how much you need to be able to generate, which is an important planning question when you're planning for retirement. And it's that you need at least 80% of your pre-retirement income for retirement. Now, I would say that might be true, but what we see often is that it's not. It's that it's at least 100%, often actually more.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you've been putting off all of these things that you've wanted to do because you haven't had the time, because you've been working, and suddenly you have some free time, I mean, my goodness, the travel, the new bass boat, the new golf clubs, I mean, you just figure it out. That you can easily spend more in the early years of retirement. Now, as you get older, it tapers off, but that happens about the same time that your healthcare spending goes up. So that rule of thumb, again, that's a perfect example of why you need to really do the numbers crunching and do the planning at some point, before you get to retirement.
Yeah, what we see a lot of times, if you look at your spending level and if you were to sort of chart it out on a graph, for better or for worse, it often ends up, if you're pre-retired here, you retire, your spending goes up. You kind of do all the fun stuff and you sort of settle into a calmer lifestyle. It comes down, and then you start having health problems and doctor's appointments and so on and so forth, and it goes back up again. So be mindful of that. That's what makes planning difficult. And that actually leads perfectly into the next rule of thumb, which is the 4% withdrawal rate, safe withdrawal rate. Now, this has been, people have said, it's actually 3.9, it's actually 4.5. The reality is that the 4% withdrawal rate is a rate that you can realistically take 4% of your portfolio value starting in year one, add an inflation bump every year, and you can realistically rely on that being sustainable over the course of 30 years, typical retirement time frame. With the original study was a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio.
So if you have a 4% distribution rule of thumb, does that mean that you're recalculating how much you take each year? So if you have a drop in the account value, you take a little bit less that year, or is it, how's that rule of thumb work?
Yeah, so you take the 4% of your beginning portfolio value and you take that out. The following year, you take that same amount and just add an inflation bump to it. You give yourself a small pay raise and you take that out. And it goes on like that year after year. So you're not really changing the amount that you're taking, except for the fact that you're increasing it with inflation. So one thing you're not doing is you're not taking advantage of the market ups and downs. If you wanted to be more dynamic, you could actually spend more in years where the market is up and pull back on spending when the market's down. And that probably allows for a little more flexibility. And
yeah, this is an area where spending, financial planning and distribution planning, and I would think that this is an area where a lot can be gained in terms of, sort of optimizing your income in retirement. So rules of thumb aren't always great. This one makes me nervous.
Yeah, because real life is not perfectly planned out where you take the same income every year. Stuff happens.
Yeah.
You need a new roof. You have a health event. And that sort of throws everything into question if you're using a rule of thumb.
Archie, I get it. I know you get it all the time. I get it where people, as they start to get close to retirement, say, I need to make sure that all my debt is paid off. That's a rule of thumb that you hear oftentimes, that you want to enter retirement with all of your debt paid off.
Yeah, or even pre-retirement.
Or even pre-retirement.
If you're a Dave Ramsey person, no debt, pay off all of your debt. Well,
and we're talking about all debt, even mortgages.
Yeah. Like later on down the process with Dave Ramsey, you get your mortgage paid off. I would say that on one hand, there's a lot of good that comes from that. I think we can all see that being debt-free is great for your mental health. You'll feel awesome. However, there is also this trade-off with earning a rate of return in the market. If you have high interest debt, yeah, I think it's fair to say you should pay that off. You should not carry high interest debt, credit card debt, for example. However, if you have a 2% mortgage rate, if you're one of these lucky people that a few years back took out a new mortgage at 2%, it is hard to make the argument that you should forego investing money for the sake of paying that off.
Right. It may feel good, but it may not be the optimal financial approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let's say that you have a 2% mortgage but you have too much house. Right? I think every situation is unique. If you made the mistake of buying too much house, maybe the solution isn't go pay off the debt and forego investing. Maybe it's you bought too much house, sell the house, buy something more manageable, keep a mortgage and invest, and balance these competing priorities so that you're not taking from your future self to give peace of mind to your current self.
Archie, I think I see this as another example of, people make financial decisions based on the way the decision makes them feel. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work well. It doesn't work well in this case with, being hell-bent on not having any debt of any kind. It doesn't work well with investing, whether you feel like you're missing out on a rising market, so you put too much money at risk, or whether you feel like you need to get out of the market because the market's going down. Those are emotional decisions. Those are feel good or feel bad type decisions that don't serve you very well. And this is another example when it comes to debt sometimes.
I like what you said about when the market is exciting and you want to put too much money in. I think that temptation, I've experienced the temptation where you have an emergency fund and you're like, there is a ripe buying opportunity right now.
Yep.
What if I just took this extra cash for emergencies and put it in the market?
Well, let's talk about that. That's a rule of thumb, having 3 to 6 months in an emergency fund. Is that like sacrosanct? Can you not penetrate that because you get excited about the markets?
My thinking on this, again, because the question is always, well, how much should I have in an emergency fund? And the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of expenses. But that's not always true. You might not need that much, or you might need more than that.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Say you are in a line of work, you own a business, or you work for, a business like this where it's, when it rains, it pours. It's really lumpy. You get a lot of income and then you get no income. And it's hard to predict when you're going to get paid. Those are situations where it probably makes sense to have more than 6 months. I mean, the business, how long realistically, if we had a recession or something like that, you could have to go without income. maybe you need a year's worth of expenses available.
Another example would be if you have an old house or a house that's got a roof that's 25 years old. It's not leaking yet, but you know that can come, or your HVAC system is getting a little long in the tooth. That's an example where you might be well served to have a little extra set aside in that emergency fund.
On the flip side, maybe you're someone who has saved really, really well, and you have a retirement plan that is overfunded, and you're a risk taker. You're very comfortable with risk. Maybe you feel like, hey, I don't need quite as much in an emergency fund. I'm comfortable with the idea that I could pull from my investment portfolio because I've got plenty, and I want that cash to be working for me. There's an argument to be made for that. You're not reducing your probability of a successful retirement by doing it, and you're a heavy risk taker. There's an argument to be made for that. I'm someone who falls kind of in the middle. I like having cash. It gives me a sense of security. I know that whatever happens in the market, I've got liquidity. So but that's another rule of thumb that's, may or may not really apply to you.
How about another one? We've got the rule of thumb about Social Security and when you claim that.
Yeah, and it's usually the rule of thumb is delay it as long as you can, which is to age 70.
Right. Everybody's situation is different. And I've had these conversations. I had a longtime client who was like, he said, Rob, I know that our financial plan score is more favorable if I wait to take Social Security. But I'm going to take it at 62 because my dad didn't, and he died at a very young age. And unfortunately, the client was right. He did not live very long, and he was right to take that Social Security benefit at 62, which almost never makes sense from a pure numbers standpoint. But if there's something in your life that makes you think that you may not have that benefit, or you may not live long enough to maximize the benefit, then you may want to do that. Other people are worried. People think of what's going to happen to Social Security because you hear about the Social Security Trust running out of money in 2034, I think was the most recent year that I saw. That's not likely to be the case, but it might be a factor in the decision-making process for you.
Yeah. Again, this is why it's important to look at the context of your situation and make a decision based on that and what concerns you, what fears you have, but also, taking into account that there is a reason why this rule of thumb exists. And it's because if you live past, your early 80s, for most people, 70 ends up giving you the highest cumulative benefit of your life. But, our lives are, none of us know when we're going to live to. So
Right.
it's important to think that through carefully.
So rules of thumb, to sum it up, are great in the absence of a financial plan. If you don't have a financial plan and can't do a financial plan, then rely on rules of thumb. But that's not the best approach.
Yeah. Treat it as a starting point.
Yeah.
And then, if you don't have a financial plan, do some research, learn and expand on those rules of thumb, learn about when you wouldn't use them, and ideally create a financial plan or work with a financial planner to actually consider your situation and make sure that one of these rules of thumb isn't kind of leading you in the wrong direction.
Archie, before we wrap up, I just want to let people know that we've created some great tools that help you do some of this planning yourself without using rules of thumb. You can get to those by going to the Last Paycheck website and checking that out. They're free of charge. They're there for you to use in whatever way makes sense.
Yep. Awesome. Well, if you like the episode, like the video, remember to subscribe and leave us a comment with thoughts or questions or episode ideas. We'd love to hear from you all. And then share it with your family and friends, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.